1 year ago tomorrow, on December 5th, 2014, investigative reporter and RFERL contributor Khadija Ismayilova was arrested in the capital of Azerbaijan, Baku. She spent the last year behind bars, and she's going to do another 7.5 years in jail. Azerbaijan, meanwhile, continues to silence its critics, and the regime of the president Ilham Aliyev has remained largely untouched. This is a regime that Khadija has spent much of her professional life documenting and following, and on the occasion of the anniversary of her arrest, RFERL has gathered together some of the people who know her and her work best to talk about her case, the situation in Azerbaijan, and the situation facing investigative reporting in the post-Soviet region generally. My name is Daisy Sindelar. I'm the European Regional Director at RFERL, and I would like to introduce two of our panel members who are with me here in Prague. First, Drew Sullivan, who is a long-time investigative journalist himself and the director of OCCRP, which is the, I want to make sure I get it exactly right, the Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project, which is an outfit that worked extensively with Khadija on a number of her pieces. So you know her and her work quite well. And on my other side, we have Ilkin Mammadov, who is the head of our Azerbaijani Service, so someone who knows Khadija personally, knows her family, and as director of the service is someone who's basically our main liaison with lawyers and people connected to the case. Then in DC, we have two additional panel members. We have John Donnelly, who's a senior writer focusing on defense and foreign policy at Congressional Quarterly, which reports on the work of the U.S. Congress. More relevant to this discussion, Donnelly is the chair of the Press Freedom Committee at the U.S. National Press Club, which just this year, in June 2015, awarded Khadija Ismayilova its John Abishan Press Freedom Award. We also have Kyle Parker, who is a longtime observer of democracy and rule of law issues in the post-Soviet space, and now serves as a senior staffer with the Committee on Foreign Affairs of the U.S. House of Representatives, where he oversees the State Department's Bureau of European and Eurasian Affairs. Last but not least, we have Johann Bihr, who works for Reporters with probably the best-known global press watchdog. He joins us from Paris, and he leads the European and Central Asia desk. So I would really like to welcome all of our panelists. I want to add, too, that in the Reporters Without Borders in its 2015 Press Freedom Survey included Azerbaijan on its blacklist of the worst-rated countries in terms of press freedom. So we have a really distinguished panel here today. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
So let's turn first to Drew Sullivan, who, as I mentioned before, worked with Khadija. His group, OCCRP, worked with Khadija on a number of probably the articles that she's come to be best known for, including a piece I remember distinctly in 2002 that documented how the family of President Ilham Aliyev had personally earned millions of dollars through illegal construction surrounding the building of this opulent crystal hall for the Eurovision contest that the country was famously hosting that year. On the occasion of the anniversary of her arrest, OCCRP and our company, RFERL, were looking for a way to honor Khadija's work as an investigative journalist. So I want to turn it over to Drew to talk about the initiative that we're launching.
Thanks, Daisy. You know, it's really hard to find a good initiative for Khadija because she was really such an outsized person in life. I mean, she was really, truly amazing. And what we wanted to do is do something that would affect young journalists, because she worked very closely with young journalists, but also to report on people in power, which was really her passion. And so we came up with a fellowship for a reporter from the region that RFE and OCCRP covers, to kind of be to have 6 to 7 months to work exclusively on covering people in positions of power. It's a learning and it's a working fellowship, and the idea is to get that person working with OCCRP and Radio Free Europe and go out there and report on these, and we will pay all expenses. And provide honorarium. And there'll be more information that will be soon available on the website of both OCCRP and Radio Free Europe. You know, Azerbaijan attempted to silence her by putting her in prison, and the idea is that she will not be silenced, that more people will step in, take her place, and continue her work. And so this is an opportunity for a good, young, smart journalist to spend 7 months following the footsteps of Khadija and doing the work, and I think that's what Khadija would have wanted.
Mm-hmm. And it's worth noting this is open to journalists not only in Azerbaijan, but in all of the countries that RFE broadcasts to. So again, the details will be available on your website and ours, rferl.org, in the coming days. I'd like to say at this point, too, that if you are watching and would like to send in any questions or comments through Twitter, at RFERL Live, which is hashtag RFERLIVE. And now I want to turn to Ilkin, who again is the head of our Azerbaijani service here at RFERL and has worked with Khadija for many years and recently was in Baku. What can you tell us right now about where her case stands?
Okay, first of all, as I know Khadija from 1998, as I remember, we started working for news. And I just met her recently, at unfortunately a trial appeal. It was postponed, but Khadija, seems even much better, much enthusiastic, and I would say compared even to journalists who came to courtroom to report on her case, even more journalists than say it, because I felt she was quite calm. She was as always, with her sense of humor, little bit sarcastic, but also very positive, and she knows what to do. And she knows that it's not just for a short time, as we can see from her actual last message, and from her mother's visit. And she doesn't want anyone to believe to this idea or some utopias that she'll be released as a bargaining option soon, etc. She wants to be her colleagues and just to be a stronger, even more. And actually, I want to just thank Drew, and also I feel like this fellowship, it's really something that Khadija would love. It's something that really because I know Khadija, as a colleagues, it's more important that nobody forgets not Khadija, but the cause. What's more important here, because especially after her arrest, it's not easy in Azerbaijan. That it's not. It wasn't. All journalists, all her colleagues, but few ones who wanted to start. They lost a lot. They were scared. They don't have access to, I would say, to tools, and they don't know how to. On legal side, honestly, from very beginning, we knew that this is just frost, but as we were communicating to lawyers, we wanted everything to be accordingly, because the Azeri justice system will do their best to keep her case in trials, as much as possible, that nobody even visits that, and she will not get any and this trial will not be even covered enough. But it's not a goal for Khadija, for Khadija's lawyers, for us, because this is a case for Khadija will have the chance and right, hopefully, to defend her rights, protect her rights at the European Court. Now, as appeal was rejected and she's already transferred to the prison, she has 2 more steps on country level at Supreme Court, and after that, the case will be taken to European Human Rights Court. And there, actually, this is also, kind of, it was expected from very beginning, but Azeri government regime didn't do anything. even though if they knew that this is case for European court, to do at least, procedures according. Because Khadija didn't have even right for final speech. They'll say, and Khadija, RFRL tried to send opinion about Khadija's legal case, about accusations, etc. They didn't accept anything. So if Khadija will face any trial, it will be on European court, and it's. I don't want just to predict anything, but it's in advance. It's quite obvious that Khadija is on a winning side. This is first. Second thing is that trial process shows to all of the inside the country who are not indifferent to media, to this news. There is journalists who tried to investigate family, ruling family in Azerbaijan, and she was arrested for that. This is actually what government does, crack down not on all human rights activists, but in case of Khadija, it was quite obvious that, and it was like message to the people who, even the people who didn't know Khadija, got interested. Why they arrested her? Because on trial they couldn't provide, prosecutors any fact that would prove at least something.
It's worth pointing out, you mentioned, but I want to underscore the fact that Khadija was, until recently, in pretrial detention and was moved to the women's prison virtually with no announcement. As I understand, even her mother didn't know, her family hadn't been alerted, you didn't know. It was done quite secretly. So for the past week or so, she has now been in the single women's prison that exists in Azerbaijan. Don't know a great deal about her condition now, but we are able to say that she was able today for the first time to pass a message to RFRL through her mother, and I wanted to read it. She says, "I am still on my journey." This was a message that was sent yesterday, December 3rd. "I am still on my journey. I continue my fight. As on the first day that I arrived in jail, I still have my smile and my sense of humor. At my trials, I feel as though I have been the winner." Now, you got a chance to see her in the appeals process, and as you said, she seemed pretty feisty. Can you tell us a little bit? She was holding up pieces of paper while she was in, of course, while you were on trial in Azerbaijan and other post-Soviet countries, you have the unusual distinction of being inside a glass cage. So she was inside the glass cage, not always able to communicate through a microphone. But what was she doing instead?
Yeah, first of all, I would like to stress that quite funny that they first invite all journalists or who wanna just watch Khadija's trial to another country, because they don't want Khadija even to communicate to them when she will enter the room, because they don't want someone to start chanting Khadija. So then they change room and announce that, okay, now you should go to second court room, and Khadija is ready. Khadija knows that what will happen, and she was, with papers over there. And when journalists start, she had her report, 2 sentences. She did her best to pass information about solitary confinement that underage people in pretrial detention centers were held there, and it's illegal. But
so she was holding up a piece of paper that said that underage people were being held in prison in solitary confinement.
She's still reporting.
So
she's
still
still reporting. That's why when someone tells that oh, you are reporting, you're saying oh, now we have a reporter from prison. Because she's even in that conditions, and it's I know that Khadija is trying to be in order to encourage other people, and we also to be enthusiastic or looking good always with makeups, etc. It's Khadija looking, but it's not easy, especially in Azerbaijan. It's not easy.
Well, I wanted to. That's a good note to to turn to, because of course we know Khadija as a colleague and a friend. Obviously, we want to think of her as being in a feisty mood and fighting for not only her own case, but the rights of other prisoners. But of course, being in prison in Azerbaijan is a very serious situation. Azerbaijani prisons are notorious for ill treatment. We know that there are dozens of journalists and other public critics who remain behind bars. So I wanted to turn to you, Johann Bihr at Reporters Without Borders, and ask you if you can sort of bring us up to date on what the situation is in Azerbaijan with reporters and other government critics who are behind.
Sure. Thank you first for reading out this letter. This is quite emotional, and this is really like Khadija. I mean, this is no surprise, and this is good to hear this. She's really a very, very brave and outstanding journalist and woman in general. Azerbaijan, so the case of Khadija is very exemplary of the war on criticism that has been waged by the government over the past, years, and even more so over the past 2 years. We count now a very minimum of 8 journalists and 4 bloggers in jail for their information work. There are parts of about 100 political prisoners in the country. So this is really not an exaggeration to tell that human rights defenders, independent journalists, opposition politicians in Azerbaijan only have the choice between prison or exile or shutting up. This is the only alternatives they have. A relative small space of pluralism used to exist in Azerbaijan until about 2013, a very, very small space, but still. And it's been now 2 years since the government has tried to eliminate this very last space of independent reporting in the country. So apart from jailing independent journalists, all methods are used. It goes with intimidations, attacks, physical attacks, pressure on family, and also economic pressures on media outlets so that they are forced to close down. This was the case, for instance, last year with the Russian-speaking newspaper Zerkala, who was forced to close down. The prominent opposition newspaper Azadlik is currently in a rather similar situation, totally crippled by debt and unable to sell its already very limited number of copies throughout the countries. And now that there are nearly no journalists, no independent journalists left in the country, the authorities have turned to foreign-based journalists, foreign-based media. So over the past few months, the pressure has been particularly intense on Meydan TV, for instance, a web TV that has been launched by prominent blogger Emin Milli, who is based in Germany. So many of his family members that remained in Azerbaijan have been arrested for, under absolutely trumped-up charges, typically drug detention or petty hooliganism or stuff like this. Some of the remaining family members in Azerbaijan have been forced to sign a letter addressing the president and explicitly stating that, Mr. President, we absolutely don't have anything to do with Emin Milli. We are family members, yes, but we don't support him. He is a traitor, etc. So this is very telling as per the state of intimidation reached in the country. The same goes with Ganimat Zahid, who founded another prominent foreign-based media, which is Azerbaijan Saati. It's a satellite TV show that it broadcasted twice a week in Azerbaijan. And the same, at least 3 or 4, I think, or even 5 of his cousins, nephews were arrested over the past few months under trumped-up charges. Even his very old mother is under surveillance in the village where she lives. So the government really stopped at nothing to put pressure on foreign-based journalists, including turning against family members who are not remotely close to them, who are simply, they simply happen to be part of their family, and that is the only link. So the picture is very bleak, unfortunately, but still we can only hail the courage and the determination of the handful of journalists that continue working in such conditions, the work of including RFE-RL, Azerbaijani Service, obviously, but also of Meydan TV and the others, Turan agency. So just these journalists which still try to do their job, to do just simple journalism as it should be in such a harsh environment. Just
Can I jump in? It's worth mentioning that you're giving a very long list of media organizations that have faced a difficult time in Baku, and of course RFE-RL is one of them.
Precisely.
December 2014 was the month that Khadija was arrested. It was also the month that our bureau in Baku was closed. We have no longer had an official presence in the country, and our journalists there continue to work under extremely stressful circumstances.
Absolutely.
It's a situation that we've experienced firsthand. And
I will only add, maybe, sorry, if I may, just to sum up, that Azerbaijan ranks 162 out of 180 countries in our latest Press Freedom Index. So this is also telling, I suppose.
You mentioned the pressure on the families, and one of the cases, it doesn't involve journalists directly, but one of the best-known cases in that regard this year in Azerbaijan, of course, has to do with Leyla Yunus, who is an activist and has been in detention for over a year, despite being elderly and in extremely poor health, and her husband was jailed as well. And this has been probably one of the most prominent cases of a married couple being jailed separately on very spurious charges. He was recently released due to failing health. She remains in jail. What kind of message does that send to the community in Azerbaijan when you can see people who are very highly regarded within within civil society being treated as roughly as the Yunuses are?
Mm-hmm. Well, this obviously shows that there is no limit in the government repression. And for long, we kind of had some thin hope that, for instance, they wouldn't touch Khadija because she is too famous, she's too recognized, even internationally, the laureate of many journalistic prizes. And the same with Leyla Yunus. They were kind of red lines. But obviously, attacking them, arresting them, is one more sign, if that was needed, showing that the government stops at nothing. This is the same with all prominent human rights defenders in the country. Media support NGOs as well. NGOs has been very severely, very harshly suppressed. For instance, the Institute for Reporters' Freedom and Safety, one of the major press freedom NGO in the country, which was keeping tabs on press freedom violations, providing assistance to journalists in dire straits, providing judiciary assistance. So this NGO was shut down in the country, with its leader Emin Husseinov being forced to flee and to live in an embassy in Baku during nearly a year, and it's only recently, well, during the European Games that he was allowed to leave the country at last. So the crackdown is general. It targets independent journalists, but also all human rights defenders, and obviously also the political opposition. The message is, I think, towards the civil society that there is no limit and that the only way is to shut up. But there is also probably a message of self-confidence towards the international community. And I'm personally very much convinced that if Baku resorted to such excesses, it's because it feels it can, because it feels that there is a total impunity surrounding well, for the authoritarian regime of President Aliyev, because it knows about the strategic situation of Azerbaijan, the need for Europe to have Azerbaijan as a partner, strategically situated somewhere between Iran and Russia, which is rich in oil, etc. So this really, I'm sure, plays a role, and a message as well towards the international community is this self-confidence. So I believe that the international community has the duty to show that actually it cares, and that this impunity cannot last any longer. And one special message for France, for instance, I'm based in Paris, but Leyla Yunus received the highest possible award by the French Republic, the Légion d'honneur. So we can only call on the French authorities to really do more and to do all they can to ensure the release of Leyla Yunus, who was awarded this prize, and as such recognized by the French Republic as a prominent human rights defender.
Well, but the wife of Ilham Aliyev, Mehriban Aliyeva, has also been a very generous contributor to cultural projects in France. It's a complicated issue for the government to deal with. What kind of efforts let me turn actually at this moment to John Donnelly, because the last time you were with us, John, we had a very interesting conversation along these lines about what national governments can do in the face of lobbying efforts by this very wealthy regime. And if it's a funny thing about Azerbaijan in the West, if there are things that an ordinary person knows about Azerbaijan at this point, Khadija Ismayilova is one of them. It's been a remarkable lobbying effort. She is really a well-known journalist in the West. She's had pieces published. She's received numerous awards, including your own Press Freedom Award. Can you tell us a little bit about the efforts behind promoting her and her cause, and how that may have helped her case, despite the fact that she is now in jail and facing 7.5 years in jail? Could it have been worse for her?
Boy, it's really hard to say whether or not it could have been worse. I wish I could say something different, but I'm quite discouraged by the inability of us to help her more, or at all, perhaps. We have done a lot. I mean, you mentioned the Press Freedom Award, but in her case, we actually tried a number of steps that we hadn't tried before, sort of unorthodox things, like, for example, you're reaching out to officials in the U.S. government, reaching out to Azeri officials here in the United States, trying to lean on U.S. corporate sponsors of the Baku Games this past summer, namely Coca-Cola and Procter & Gamble. These are things we hadn't normally done. You know, we ordinarily will put out a statement, we'll have an event, but we were trying to look for pressure points to try to do what we can to help Khadija. But it didn't work. And I think that this issue of impunity is a real one. I think that there is a limit. In fact, I heard it from the mouth of a State Department official that they do pull punches when it comes to Azerbaijan because of its strategic location, because of its energy resources, and there is a limit to the pressure that the United States can put on. But also, the United States is not even necessarily the most the greatest influence on Azerbaijan. In fact, you could make the case that other countries like Israel or those in Europe might have more sway over them. But so it's been really hard to watch. That our efforts have not paid off in the way that we would like, and I can't help but believe that if the U.S. government tried to lean on them a little bit more, it might help. But I have no way of knowing. All we can do is keep pushing forward.
Well, let me turn to Kyle Parker, who played a role in what is seen, at least in this part of the world, as an enormously successful piece of legislation, which is the Magnitsky Act, which imposed sanctions on Russia in response to the death of a Russian whistleblower in prison. Can you tell us a little bit about that case and why it was successfully pushed through Congress at a time when the U.S. government can be seen as failing to act in certain human rights related cases?
Well, that was a case, for those who don't know, of a Russian attorney, as you mentioned, Daisy, who had been working for an American law firm in Moscow, and in the course of his work uncovered a massive, in fact, the largest tax rebate fraud in Russian history, and how a variety of Russian officials working in the tax ministries and police and in the courts had colluded together to steal essentially Russian taxes, not money from any Western company, and had then laundered it in the West and spirited it out. Some of it went through banks in New York City. Some of it ended up in property in New York City that's right now subject to a seizure order in the Southern District of New York and other parts of the world. And he was in prison in pretrial detention. Actually, was never charged for nearly a year and under increasingly torturous conditions, withheld medical care, and in the final hours of his life transferred to a prison and beaten by riot guards until he was dead. And this was, this was a case that really, I think, touched the average Russian, because here you had a simple Muscovite who came to work every day and did his job, and it wasn't like some of the prior cases where you had companies that had wanted their money back, but simply a Russian patriot trying to act on what were then the exhortations of then President Medvedev to fight corruption and legal nihilism, and this is how it ended for him. And so this case worked its way through 2 successive Congresses and ended up being attached to the Jackson-Vanik repeal for Russia. I think one of the reasons it was successful was because how concrete it was and how personal it was and how much you had the face of this individual, and it became a rallying cry for other individuals in other cases, and Congress heard that cry and broadened it to make it a universal sanction against human rights abuses in Russia. There are now efforts in Congress to broaden it even further, possibly globally, possibly piecemeal with specific countries. But it was something, of course, that was vociferously opposed by the Russian government, and I think that was one of the reasons that you kind of gauging our success by their reaction, how much it really got to them. As for how successful that approach is, I think that remains to be seen. Some of these things have worked in the past, as you said, John. Despite all of these efforts, and you see in the case of Khadija, it hasn't seemed to help. But the one thing I think it's very effective at doing is making sure that these conversations remain at the forefront of bilateral relations with these countries. That's what happens when you get sanctions involved. That's what happens. You keep the issue alive, if nothing else. And it's also acknowledging the limited role we might be able, how we might be able to affect this inside. It's answering for our side of the street, because what that law, the Magnitsky Act, did was it banned foreign travel of these individuals, and as well it froze or blocked any bank accounts in the United States. A very fair administrative sanction, and one that I think is particularly effective in countries where you have a global elite that rely on the rule of law and the protection for ill-gotten gains in the West, even as they've destroyed the rule of law and trashed it in their own country. And because it's looking at corruption, it's something that resonates even in crowds where you might not expect it to, with nationalists or others. Everybody's against being stolen from.
Now, Russia is a big country, and obviously its role on the global stage, its strategic importance, is dramatically different from that of a small country like Azerbaijan. Do you think that that is in part an explanation for why the Magnitsky Act succeeded, whereas cases like Khadijas are not enough to gather steam behind legislative changes or sanctions or any kind of gesture on the part of the U.S. government against Azerbaijan?
I don't know that I would see it that way, precisely because Russia is such a big and powerful country, and that the business footprint is larger and other things. The opposition to the law was even greater. I don't think this is a tool, again, for countries like North Korea. If you don't have exposure to the Western financial system, if you aren't frequently traveling abroad, then these penalties don't seem to mean too much to you. But when you do have, again, officials who value their ability to make a quick exit, should again the tables turn on them, and they go from being in power to being pursued, and also the desire to shelter and launder the proceeds, then yes, this can be very effective. And I don't think that Khadija's case in any way is not enough or hasn't succeeded. These things are under active discussion right now. And again, I caution to say that we shouldn't be overly optimistic on how these could somehow get people out of jail immediately. But they will ensure that these cases don't disappear from the conversation. They will keep that alive. And in the Russian context, we saw that despite Russian protestations that these things didn't matter to them, they matter a great deal, and it's to still continue to hear from Russians who are looking to either avoid sanctions or have spent lots of money on lobbying efforts in Washington to make sure they don't end up on such lists. So it touches a nerve.
If I could just chime in there, we had a conversation with an Azeri diplomat here, and he said that the harsher the criticism is of Azerbaijan, the less likely it is to be effective. But of course, that's exactly what you would say if you want the criticism to stop, if the criticism is having an impact. And so I agree 100% with that statement that this does bother them, this does affect them, they want it to stop. They don't want Khadija and other cases to be in the headlines. In fact, Khadija's story was on the front page of the Washington Post the day before we met. So it was definitely a hot issue on that day. And I'm not saying that the United States has unlimited influence on Azerbaijan. What I am saying is that I believe that maybe not right away, but eventually continual pressure on these regimes does have some measure of impact.
Well, to that end, I just wanted to take note of the fact that press attention to Khadija's case certainly does continue, and most recently this week she was included by Foreign Policy magazine among its global thinkers for 2015 for standing strong against Caspian corruption. So her name does, and her image continues to be quite powerful in the West. I want to change tack a little bit and talk about investigative journalism and whether Khadija's case has really had a silencing effect in the region, or to the contrary, is it inspiring a new young generation of people who are watching her case and realizing the important role that journalism has to play? Drew, do you have some ideas about that?
The answer is yes and no. I mean, it devastated investigative reporting in Azerbaijan as pretty much as soon as it happened. I don't think people truly understand who Khadija was. I mean, she was kind of the one degree of separation of all the investigative reporters in the country. She was their teacher. She was the main teacher of investigative reporting. She had the best connections internationally with investigative reporters. Really, a large number of people looked up to her and took leads from her on investigative reporting. So when she was arrested, it truly devastated investigative reporting in the country. However, I mean, one of the things we did is, you know, we're not victims here. You know, I don't think Khadija sees herself as a victim. This is a situation that we understand as reporters. This can happen, and you know, OCCRP, on the encouragement of Khadija, you know, one of Khadija's messages to us was, "Finish my work, keep working," and OCCRP started the Khadija Project, which is essentially a large number of reporters continuing her work. And we've published about 8 major projects. We've got 4 more in the can. One was published today. We've got a very big one coming out in 10 days. And I can guarantee you that the arrest of Khadija has been far more problematic for the government than having left her alone. Because now we've got Swedish television and ICIJ and large numbers of reporters across the world taking interest in the story and helping us. And so we've dedicated ourselves to 7.5 years of investigative reporting on Azerbaijan. And in that time, we will have done far more than Khadija could have done. And so, you know, you basically, the greatest thing we can do as investigative reporters is to finish each other's work if anything happens to people, and to make it always, everybody who does this pays a price. And I think Azerbaijan has paid a price. And they've sent messages to us that we will get what we deserve. And to me, that means a very large grant, but I think they have a different view of what that means. You know, but it also has raised this issue. And, you know, reporters, as great as all these organizations are out to help the reporters' greatest strength is in other reporters, and in having people continue to cover their story and continue to look at these issues. And so I think in the long run, it's actually helped. And I think why we're still in a situation where a lot of reporters are still afraid. You know, many of the reporters we work with, they work undercover. We don't even tell other Azerbaijani reporters that we work with them. You know, we have to kind of stovepipe everything. Many of them have had family members arrested. It's not public knowledge yet, but they're dealing with very difficult situations, firings, other things that are happening with their families. And so, but you know, the work will go on. And I think we've heard from a lot of young reporters, some of whom have had to leave the country, that now they want to be investigative reporters. Now they want to be Khadija. And I think in the long run, it will serve to much better in creating a esprit de corps and a sense of strong investigative reporting in Azerbaijan.
Mm-hmm. What about beyond Azerbaijan? Is Khadija a well-known figure in the post-Soviet space? Is there a growing interest in investigative journalism? Of course, Azerbaijan is a particularly bleak example, but none of the countries in that region are stellar when it comes to press freedom or
right. It's slow.
Transparency.
It's slow. I mean, even in Russia, there's a few model investigative reporting organizations out there, but for the most part, it drops off very quickly after that. So, you know, that's part of our job, is to build these relationships. Khadija had relationships with almost every major investigative reporter in that region. You know, she knew, you know, Armenian reporters who were doing investigative reporting. You know, she kept you know, touch with everybody. And I think you know, that this concept of cross-border investigative reporting, it's cheaper, it's better, it's faster, is growing, and people are realizing that you can do work that you couldn't before. Khadija, you know, in most of her career, she was not an investigative reporter. it was really only in the last couple years that she really embraced it and really started to do great work. And a lot of it was the availability of some scraped Panamanian records that we were able to find that was able to solve a problem she had had for many years, which was an offshore. She couldn't track things down. And then she really began to embrace it. And I think you will see it's like a wildfire. It starts very slowly, it smolders for a long time, and then it starts to grow really brightly. And I think you see, thanks to the U.S. government, Open Society, and a lot of other organizations that are funding this cross-border work, that you see that the fire is catching in a lot of places. And while we failed in the many years that reporting was easy, to build investigative reporting, now that it's difficult, we look at what we truly value. And I think in many of these countries, people are starting to do it. And we're hearing from Central Asian reporters, who have really not done much work at all, to get involved. And so I think Khadijas is a case that shows the strength of working together in investigative reporting. And I think people will see that and act on it.
Mm-hmm. I wanted to ask you, Ilkin, because we just had parliamentary elections in Azerbaijan that basically took place in a media vacuum. There was very little reporting in the run-up to the elections. Do you see, in the piece that we had today about Khadija behind bars, we've seen instances where her reporting behind bars has resulted in actual action on the part of prison authorities. They investigated the case of the minors being held in solitary confinement. Let's talk about the big reporting that she did before she was arrested and put behind bars. Do you see any kind of consequences or any action on the part of the Azerbaijani government that is signaling weakness, change, reaction to this reporting?
First of all, I would like just start with the fact that I'm on the same page with Drew. It's not only about investigative reporting; it's also regarding general reporting in Azerbaijan. Khadija's arrest, Khadija wasn't picked up just accidentally or for her investigation, particular ones. No, because the same thing with Intigam Aliyev, with her, they picked up the strongest ones, just to show, to scare others. On a short term, yeah, it worked. Even journalists, reporters, they were scared, especially after Khadija's arrest, after Baku bureau closure, this persecution, questioning. Everyone was scared, but this pushed us also the investigative reporting to a new model, crowdsourcing. This is actually government, these regimes, they help us innovate at some cost. Khadija was arrested, but the fact that Khadija didn't flee Azerbaijan, she stayed, and she knew that she will be arrested. This encouraged others, just irrelevant people from other countries, journalists, to help to continue with the projects. And this is important. The same thing with news coverage, what we have. Yeah, now in Azerbaijan, even compared to December 2014, there's few remaining, and you can even count maximum almost 30 journalists you can find who will report, just in case. But again, the same thing happened in journalism, that because there are no available journalists, some of them scared, left the country, etc., citizen journalism is growing. This is more important for us, because this is some new models that it's easy to train, it's even cheaper. If you teach them to report properly, to double check facts, it will be some powers that no regimes can handle it. And people are more willing, because now after Khadija's arrest, after Baku bureau closure, also we continue operations. But, for people inside Azerbaijan, because of internet, they block our websites, Maidan website. People who are just ordinary TV, they open, nothing happens. They start getting just wondering what's going on. It's just the same thing that happened, in Cairo when they just shut down internet. Even irrelevant people start going to Tahrir. the same thing is going on in Azerbaijan, because more pressure on media, people start going easy to just speculation, websites, information, and now people are, in Azeri regime, after events regarding KGB, elections, Nardaran, they start understanding that this is very dangerous game, what they play. If you don't have any just reality check in Azerbaijan or normal investigation reporting, then you will have, I don't want to name anyone, but you will have just pretending investigators who works on compromise, and just each oligarch will use their own media just to blackmail someone else. This is what's going on now in Azerbaijan, but honestly, on a short term, yet it was very bad. It was, shaking. But again, as we used to talk, it was disruption. But, on a long run, it helps, because even Azeri people with limited access to Western media, with limited access to internet, they start getting interested in investigations. Khadija's investigation reports more after her arrest. This is more important, because everyone is just wondering why she was arrested. Nobody, even people who didn't know Khadija or didn't, it's something beyond our usual reach. Because this is something Leila Yunus arrest, Ilkin Mammadov's arrest, Khadija's arrest, and the way how they were arrested attracts attention that look. This works against the regime.
Well, I wanted to ask a question of our panelists in DC too. Of course, all of this is coming. Azerbaijan is our focus today, but this comes at a time when journalism as a profession is undergoing a huge change in the West, as well as everywhere else. Do you think a case like Khadija's has reawakened interest in investigative journalism?
I'm not sure. You're right. I mean, the business model is not working for newspapers, definitely in the United States and around the world. And so there are fewer resources, unfortunately, to devote to investigative journalism. There are fewer foreign staffs, for example. There are fewer regional newspapers here in the United States, and so our Congress, for example, where not far from where I'm sitting right now, we have fewer and fewer state newspapers that are covering the congressional delegations, and so we don't have as close coverage of lawmakers as we used to have. So that's not good, and overall the trends are not in a good direction from a business perspective. But I do think that people like Khadija Ismayilova inspire people to become reporters or to remain reporters. Somebody who, having been sentenced to 7.5 years in jail, can release a statement saying, "I'm winning." That's an incredible thing. Somebody who continues to report from jail, as you described earlier, is an incredibly inspiring thing that we can't lose sight of.
Kyle Parker, let me ask you a question too. Of course, we at RFE, we deal in human rights, and we work with journalists every day. I'm interested in the DC perspective. Human rights and journalism may exist in one channel of communication. Politics and business may exist in a different channel. How much interaction is there between the two? How frequently do you hear members of Congress, for example, discussing human rights issues in a country like Azerbaijan or any country in the Soviet space? Is that part of their thinking?
I think it is. I'd hesitate to guess how much of their thinking it's part of. I think it's not. I do think that we, in broadly speaking, in the journalistic human rights community covering this region, could do a better job, kind of selling this at the popular level. I think it's well understood at the top policy level that how important this is. I think there have been some events that have raised Washington's interest. I think when you look at the Russian propaganda and its role in the war in Ukraine, that's something that's been kind of a sexy topic and the subject of a lot of events in Washington and discussion. And also as we look as a government on how to spend increasingly limited assistance dollars, it to me is very clear that the biggest bang for the buck, and I know Drew actually has some figures he can put to this, is investigative journalism, more so really than almost anything else, because when this is attacked, when people like Khadija are jailed for their work, it's really an attack on the right of citizens to know and participate in nothing other than reality itself. And we see that when it's in high relief in the case of Russian propaganda that's created an alternative reality. But even if we if you were doing assistance and help with, I don't know, jury trainings, other working with NGOs, but you don't have an open space for the media, then you're building a house on sand. It's like a tree falling in the woods. But if all you have is an open space, then at least the people will have some chance of knowing what their government is up to and reacting to it themselves. And so, whatever we can do in that regard, I think there is a growing awareness of that. I would also say, in the case of Azerbaijan specifically, you mentioned these other issues. As we look ahead to what the next 5-10 years might hold in the U.S.-Azeri relations, I think we're looking at a very different set of events and circumstances than the past 10 years. With the drop in oil prices, the general drawdown in Afghanistan, a changing relationship with Iran, this has all affected that other side of the calculus, and it hasn't raised Baku's importance in capitals like Washington. So, for those who have had those worries, I think going forward, I hope we can be a little more honest and more frank, and at least respect the work of people like Khadija, who've suffered so much for telling the truth, and tell the truth here in Washington and speak very clearly about these things.
Well, I think the investigative reporting, OCCRP is just one small example, but we've been able to bring, last week, $775 million was fined. Vimpelcom, the Russian Norwegian company, was fined by Department of Justice for $775 million, and that came out of a story that we did. And that would pay, that 155 times the investment in OCCRP, and that's one of the small numbers of. We've calculated it's over 2.5 billion, and that's one news organization. So investigative reporting does clearly pay for itself, and it's a public good, and we should treat it as a public good. It's no longer in the commercial model for a number of different reasons, and even online advertising may have peaked and may go down in the future as advertisers find they don't really need the internet, they just need social media to reach their customers. You may find Google doesn't have money anymore, if you can believe that, and so that's what journalism is trying to invest in, and it's probably dead. So we need to really treat it like a public good and find ways that it can survive, because even when it was in the commercial model, it wasn't profitable. It was a loss leader.
You mentioned Vimpelcom, and of course Vimpelcom and TeliaSonera are deeply rooted in a lot of those countries in the post-Soviet space and have a lot to do. They provide records they work hand in hand with security agencies in those countries.
Well, and if I point something out too, the United States government went after the case in Uzbekistan, but they have not done any fines or seized a penny of Azerbaijani money anywhere. And there was about $1 billion in fines paid for that. So there does seem to be a double standard here, and I would expect the Department of Justice to move on some of the Azerbaijan cases, but they haven't.
That's interesting. I want to ask the last question to Johann, and then we'll wrap up. But speaking about the way that security services often collude against journalists. I wanted to, and you are in Paris, obviously the site of recent attacks. A more broad question about journalism and whether increasing security concerns on a global level are going to ultimately work against the efforts of investigative journalists by making it more difficult for them to have access to information.
I do believe that indeed these increasing security concerns create additional difficulties. In particular, I'm thinking about the increasing calls against the use of encryption tools, for instance. We've heard in Great Britain, Prime Minister Cameron being very harsh against the use of encryption tools, for instance, and this is something that has been supported in many countries around the world. In the same time, we know that such tools are crucial for especially investigative reporters, but journalists in general, to protect their sources, especially when they work in such difficult countries as Azerbaijan. So indeed, this context creates difficulties. More broadly, probably, these authoritarian regimes, such as the one of President Aliyev, know very well how to play the rhetoric of the anti-terror, of the anti-terrorism. This is something that is, well, that has been used for decades, but of course, with time, over the past few years, it becomes more and more efficient, unfortunately, as a tool to suppress dissent. We see in Turkey very recently as well how the authorities play the anti-terror speech to legitimize their crackdown on dissent. So this is very dangerous, and here, of course, democratic countries, if we can say so, should be very careful about how they use these anti-terror, use anti-terrorism in general, and how they don't legitimate authoritarian regimes using just the speech of it to legitimate crackdown on dissent. On this regard, it's probably also a worrying signal when prominent democracies such as the US or the UK or France or others themselves crack down on whistleblowers, for instance, and go out after investigative reporters. So this era which we live in, and with the recent Paris attacks, is indeed, to my point of view, difficult for investigative reporters. And this is definitely something which we need to be careful about at the global level. And I appreciated the reference you had about the surveillance tools used by the authoritarian regimes. An interesting point is that most of these tools are produced by Germany, the US, Israel, and so here there is something that needs to be done is setting up control on exports of such tools, exactly similar as the control that exists on exporting weapons, because these tools are weapons at hands of very authoritarian and repressive regimes. So.
Okay, thank you. Well, we'll leave it at that. I want to close with going from some grim conversation to one nice anecdote, one more nice anecdote about Khadija in a piece that we have on our website today at RFERL. And it reveals something about Khadija that I did not know, which is that while she was in pretrial detention, she would sing opera arias every day. And the article reads, at first her cellmates complained about her peculiar routine, but she won them over by explaining they have the right to sing. She says she sings because she and other inmates can, And it is vital not only to know your rights, but to exercise those rights every day. So I think that's a good note to close on. I really want to thank all of you for joining me today. Drew Sullivan, Ilkin Mammadov, Kyle Parker, John Connolly, and Johann Bihr, thank you so much for being with us on the eve of the anniversary of Khadija's arrest.